We'll now go into a conversation about the urbanization and how the demographics are actually changing within Africa and what that means for the future of humanity and hospitality. Now, I'm a child of the soil. I'm born and bred in Africa. I have the privilege of going around the world everywhere and gracing global stages, including the Global Citizen stage, United Nations, you name them. And I always laugh when people talk about that Africa is going to change because of urbanization. I'm saying, but Africa will always remain Africa. It doesn't matter how many buildings you put in it. In actual fact, cities are where dreams are made of and where futures are forged. And that's why a lot of people think that you can forge dreams in New York and not in Africa. But to speak more about this change and the future of it, please help me welcome to stage Aradhana Khowala. A round of applause, please. Thank you.
Am I audible? I'm audible now. Thank you, Tammy, and thank you for the energy that you've brought onto the stage all day. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, when you talk about Africa, funny enough, it typically falls into extremities, and the views are often polarizing, and it's full of cliches. Like on the one hand, you have this romanticized image of Africa, which is Africa with its endless natural beauty, the wilderness, the golden savannas, the waterfall dotted with lions and rhinos and elephants, and of course the epic scenery straight out of Hollywood. And on the other hand, you have the image of Africa where it's portrayed as the land which is a perpetual human tragedy. Famines, epidemics, violent coups, radicalization, and bitter tribal conflicts. Yes, Africa is all of these. But the problem with cliches is that they make you miss the real story. And the real story is the world itself is becoming African and becoming so fast. Let me tell you why. In 2022, 2 years ago, the world's population touched, as you know, 8 billion people. And then we had India overtake China as the most populous country. Now all eyes are on Africa because it is the fastest growing continent by population, growing 3 times faster than the rest of the world. Way back in 1900, Africa's population was a mere 140 million, which only accounted for 9% of the total population. Since then, it has actually grown tenfold, which is the highest anywhere in the world, and now stands at 1.4 billion people, which is equivalent to 17% of the world's total population. But there's more. 4 of the African countries are amongst the most populous in the world, and 17 of the top 20 fastest growing by rate are sub-Saharan countries, including South Sudan, Niger, DRC, Angola, and Senegal. By 2050, Honorable Minister, Nigeria will overtake everyone else to become the 3rd most populous country, right after India and China. And 7 African countries, of course including Nigeria, but apart from Nigeria, Ethiopia, DRC, Egypt, Tanzania, and Kenya will be among the world's top 20 most populous. The UN projects that Africa's population is going to get to 2.5 billion people by 2050. And by the same rate of projection, the global population is going to be 10 billion, which means Africa is going to be 25% of the world by 2050. And if we go another 50 years, by 2100, a staggering 4.2 billion, or just over 40% of the world, will be African. Not only will Africa be the most populous continent in the world, 1 in 3 people in the world will be African. Now, we all know that Africa is home to the youngest population. by which I mean the median age of a person in the continent is 18.8 years, which is the youngest in the world. And compare that with the global median age, which is at 31 years. Think about it, right? India is at 27. US is 38. Canada is closer to 40. Japan is over 50. Compare that to Uganda, which is 16, and Nigeria, which is 18. And what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is the workforce of the future is also African. So why did this boom happen, and why is it happening now? Reason number one, fertility, in other words, the number of babies that you make. Birth rates, as you know, globally are falling. South Korea just took the record for producing the least amount of kids everywhere in the world. Japan has a degrowing population, and it is exactly the same in the United States, China, most of Southeast Asia, and 17 different countries across Europe. And now take Africa. Niger, which has the highest rate of fertility in the world, has an average woman saying she wants 9 kids and an average man saying he wants 13 kids. That's what I call high ambition. Thank you, sir. He's got really high ambition. But it makes a difference, because if you have a Niger with 6.9 kids on an average, followed by Somalia, Chad, DRC, we are effectively looking at 31 out of 33 countries in the world where an average woman is making more than 4 children. 31 out of 33 are in Africa. Now, we have looked at the babies. Let's talk about life expectancy and mortality. Way back in 1950, Africa had a life expectancy less than 40 years. By the 1980s, it was 50 years. Between 2010 and 2015, it grew up to 60 years. Today, it is at 72 years. We're making more babies. We are dying less early. Reason number 3, urbanization. We know that we are home to the youngest population in the world. But if you go back to 1900, the 10 biggest cities around in the world, 8 of them were in Europe, and there was New York and Philadelphia in US. Today, 45% of Africa's population, which is 652 million people, are urbanized. And here's the fun part. By 2030, Tammy was talking about cities. There will be more than 1 billion people who are living in cities. And there will be 6 cities in Africa with more than 10 million, 17 cities with more than 5 million, and 90 cities with more than 1 million inhabitants. And by 2050, 65% of all of Africa will be living in big cities like Lagos, Kinshasa, and Joburg. And as Africa continues to urbanize, goods and services are not only the things that are going to flow across borders, right? When you have a continent full of very young people, it's also the art, the music, the literature, the culture, the filmmaking. I guarantee you, in the coming years, there's going to be a lot coming out of Africa, and we all are going to get more of a taste of Africa in our cultural diet in the coming years. Now, it's not just that Africa is young and getting urbanized, Africa is also getting rich. If you look at the GDP growth, in the continent, it's expected to average 3.8 and 4.2%, which is higher than the global averages. 15 African countries posted an economic expansion of more than 5% last year, and the region is expected to claim 11 out of 20 positions on the list of fastest growing economies in 2024. If you go by the wealth, last year, there were 135,000 or just over people who were millionaires, US dollars, in Africa. 342 of them owned or have a net worth of more than 100 million, and 21 are billionaires. Now, the vast majority, at least 90%, are in 5 different countries. South Africa has the highest number of high net worth investors, followed by Egypt, Nigeria, and I thought you would be interested to hear that Namibia is placed 10 in the list. But of course, it's not all peaches and cream. That would be really easy, right? So here we are. What are the challenges? We know we have an extremely young population with a median age of 18 years. But the median age of the leaders who rule Africa is 62, which is a lot older than even the OECD median age. In many cases, we know that the younger generation is more knowledgeable, more equipped, and prepared to address the fast-moving issues of today than the establishment leadership. So I guess we're going to see a lot of young Africans who are going to demand more from their government, more accountability, and there will be more of a sense of voice and agency in what their government is doing and where they are going. And I think that changes the politics of the future in a very interesting way. The resources challenge. When you have a continent with 6.5 trillion worth of natural resources and 65% of the world's uncultivated but arable land, you have no real excuse to be poor. 40% of the world's gold, 90% of the world's chromium and platinum, and the largest reserves of cobalt, diamonds, platinum, uranium in the world are all in Africa. Unfortunately, the sad thing that has happened is because there was a quest for these resources, so much of the focus was on just that. Looking for gold, looking for the minerals, used to make the mobile phones, the solar panels, the semiconductors, and the lights, and that meant we neglected our single biggest resource, which is our people. And we neglected their basic needs, which is why 387 million people in the continent live without access to basic drinking water. Or more than 640 million do not have access to electricity. Or the fact that there are 100 million children who are of school-going age but not receiving a full education. And then, of course, there is the climate change challenge. The fun thing is Africa only contributes less than 4% of the total carbon emissions globally. On a per capita basis, that is the lowest of every continent. And to put that in perspective, an average American or an Australian is emitting carbon dioxide in a month, which is the same amount that an average African is emitting in a year. Yet Africa is the most vulnerable continent to the adverse impacts of climate change. Think about it. The latest Climate Vulnerability Index says that 9 out of the top 10 world's most vulnerable countries are in sub-Saharan Africa. And between 1970 and 2020, Africa faced 15% of global weather, water, and climate-related disasters, along with 35% of weather, climate, and water-related fatalities. The UN and WEF projects that by 2025, which is a year from now, an estimated 250 million people in Africa could be exposed to increased water stress due to climate change. Now, we heard this in the morning when Nangula mentioned that we should be wary of grouping countries together, and I couldn't agree more. Haitham also said that Africa is a continent, it's not a country. So true. And true, treating all of Africa as one bundle is common, but the truth is there is nothing common to Africa, and there is so much of disparity between different countries in Africa. Africa includes giant countries which have more than 100 million population, and it has countries which have population of less than 1 million. Africa has countries which are highly urbanized and those which are barely urbanized. Niger, Uganda, Malawi, Burundi. Nigeria has an infant mortality rate of 74 deaths per 1,000 births. Tunisia has 13 deaths. Life expectancy in Sierra Leone is 54. In Mauritius, it is 75. Niger has a fertility rate of 6.9, while in South Africa, it is 2.3 kids per woman. Uganda has a median age of 16. In Tunisia, the same number is 33. Africa is a continent with over 1,500 languages, a wide range of ethnic groups, cultures, traditions. And if there is one thing that we can say firmly, it is that Africa is and will be the most demographically dynamic continent in the world in this century. So what do we do? Now, this is where I get into trouble, so I'm going to leave you with 3 pieces of advice. When I speak of challenges and I speak of urbanization and infrastructure, I get these pat answers which are widely accepted, hence not really thought through or challenged. And they come like, oh, but entrepreneurship and technologies are going to ensure we are going to leapfrog all of the problems. Let me tell you something. Some things can't be leapt over, like infrastructure, like airports and ports and railways and undersea cables and Wi-Fi and connectivity. You need infrastructure to thrive. Minister from Nigeria mentioned about it early in the morning. I have worked in 15 different countries in Africa, each time advising the heads of state, Minister of Tourism, or the private sector. It took me 19 hours to get here from London to Windhoek. That is what I would call a bottleneck and a pain point, just saying. Rapid urbanization requires adaptive planning. 1/3 of the population in Switzerland, as an example, live within 5 kilometers of the main train line crossing the country. Mobility is a critical part of development. And here's the fun part. Africa's infrastructure gap needs $170 billion annually to fill. We heard, again, the Namibia Investment Promotion Board mentioned this morning that travel and tourism itself as an industry could boost the economy by $168 billion. And guess what? Africa's estimated annual losses to corruption is $150 billion, 5% of the global GDP. So we can't continue to rely on loss of revenue from corruption. Fix the corruption problem, and that will fix the infrastructure deficit. Simple. Advice number 2. Africa doesn't need anyone's help. Africa needs to help itself. Every country needs its own climate strategy, and every country needs its own human capital strategy. It is absolutely nuts to me that people sit down at WEF in Davos to talk about the future of work, and no one is speaking from the point of view of the part of the world that's going to have the largest labor force in the world. It is exactly the same in G20, COP, and the UN. I know, because I'm often in all of these rooms, and let me tell you, the people who are going to live to 2080 or beyond are your children, are my children. It's not the people sitting in those rooms, because they will die, all of them, by 2050 latest. Don't tell them I said that, but just saying. We need to create 18 to 20 million jobs annually every year over the next 25 years. And if that doesn't happen, millions of unemployed young people are going to become perfect recruits for militant groups or human traffickers selling dreams of a better life in Europe, both of which, let me tell you, are false promises. Every country in Africa is only going to be able to enjoy the demographic dividend if they make sufficient investment in education, health, and gender equality, to each country to its own. And the final one. Sorry to break it to you, but unfortunately, people sitting in Brussels are not going to care about what Africa is going to go through. I was laughing when Olivier mentioned this morning that he decided to start Casada Capital because he was bored of sitting in conference rooms and listen to people just pontificating. We need think tanks, we need summits, we need events, we need investment, we need expos in Africa, just like Namibia has got with AHIF here in Windhoek. Just like Rwanda is doing with its events. Invest in local tourism infrastructure, invest in vocational training, start locally, then go regionally, and then look for international collaborations. Ladies and gentlemen, I started by saying Africa is a tale of extremes, and I'm going to end with that. And think about it. Whether this youthful population, whether this youthful energy is harnessed for innovation and economic progress, or whether it spirals into unrest, poverty, radicalization, remains to be seen. But I guarantee you that Africa's sheer size is going to impact every single one of us. Some countries are realizing and are here. Others will be missing out on what is soon going to make up 1/3 of the humanity. Africa's power is going to exert itself economically, socially, and environmentally. It will exert itself with its massive votes in UN. It will be an essential ally in combating global challenges like epidemics and climate change. Africa's boom is inevitable. In fact, it is already happening. And my question is only, are you in on it? Thank you very, very much.